Welcome back to the Go to the Field podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Werner.
Hey, I'm Eric Osland.
We talked in episode 3 about weed control and some different options and different herbicides out there. But today we're getting close to that prepay time when everybody's thinking about weed control for next year, what they're going to use for their pre-emergent herbicides, what they're going to use for some of their post. We have a couple products in mind today, metribuzin and mesotrione, that we want to talk about that we think is very important to include in your corn and soybean herbicide options and heading into 2026. So water hemp is by far and large the hardest weed to control, and we need to key in on that. And we think these two products can definitely help us out with some of the pre-emerge options out there. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And Ryan, water hemp, like you mentioned, it can be a lot. It can be problematic this year, but also for next year as well. If we're looking at the potential of hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant, and then all of that goes back into our soil, that's going to cause problems moving forward. And, not only in the future, but also this year. And I think it was Southern Illinois University, and we've talked about these statistics before. In corn, for every inch of weed growth, we lose 4.6 bushels. So if you think about that, if we allow weeds to reach a height of 4 inches, we're looking at, 18 bushels of yield loss in our corn crop. And similarly in soybeans, for every inch of weed growth, we lose 0.7 bushels in soybeans. So again, a 4-inch weed, which is kind of that size that we always talk about. And, we want to kill weeds before they reach 4 inches. But I think it's important to keep in mind that anytime we allow weeds to establish out in our fields, we begin to lose yield. And I think that's where these two products can really come into play. Metribuzin, I guess we can start out with that one. But when we use metribuzin and incorporate that into our soybean weed control programs, we can do a much better job of keeping those weeds from ever establishing in the first place.
Absolutely. Group 15s are utilized a lot. They're utilized a lot in corn and in soybeans. So adding metribuzin to that ahead of soybeans is a big deal. I know when we used to throw out some Group 15s and did not give metribuzin any credit for what it actually did, we started throwing it in the years to come, and it's a night and day difference. A lot better control of your water hemp. So with that, Eric, let's talk about rates. So with metribuzin, what do you recommend as a rate with a Group 15 herbicide, which Group 15 is more like your dual products. Anthem is in that arena, Zidua. Some of those products, we're talking about the straight metolachlors, acetochlors, peroxysulfone, things like that, and adding metribuzin to that. Of course, there's some premixes out there that include it already, but if you're going out with a straight Group 15, think about putting metribuzin with it.
Yeah, so when we're talking metribuzin, it's important to differentiate dry metribuzin versus liquid metribuzin. Yeah, when we look at the rate of metribuzin that we want to run, I like to start with a minimum of 6 ounces of dry metribuzin. And this can be debated sometimes because metribuzin does have the potential for some crop response. We have not seen that over the last few years with metribuzin. A lot of times where we see those issues with metribuzin might be on some lighter soils, maybe some sandier soils. But if you're not in those situations, you're very safe running 6 ounces of dry metribuzin, keeping in mind that, there are other formulations of metribuzin. There's a liquid form as well. So when you're converting dry metribuzin to liquid metribuzin, you want to add 50%. So if we're running 6 ounces of dry metribuzin, that would be equivalent to 9 ounces of liquid metribuzin. 4 ounces of dry would be 6 ounces of liquid, and so on. But that's kind of where I like to be, is at 6 ounces of dry, 9 ounces of liquid metribuzin.
Yeah, that was pretty handy for me learning that conversion. The world seems like it talks in dry as far as metribuzin, and then if you just add 50% more. So like Eric said, if you're running 6 ounces, adding 50% more, which would be an additional 3 ounces, so you'd be running 9 ounces of liquid. And usually that comes in like a 4L or a 4F. And a lot of people are switching to liquid, just it's easier to manage in a spray tank. And it is. With your Group 15s, you are getting some added benefit from small-seeded broadleaf control. You're going to get some water hemp with a Group 15, But adding the metribuzin to that is going to be night and day difference of how much added control you're going to get out of that included in the spray tank.
Yeah, so just wanted to give a brief review on metribuzin, but we also want to talk as well about mesotrione. And this is something...
Eric, one thing I forgot before we get too far, just so the audience understands too, that is with metribuzin is a pre only. So if you get in that scenario and you're planting ahead of a rain and then you do get rained out, some of the beans emerge before that, you have to take that metribuzin out of that mix or you will burn your beans. So just a little caution there that has to be pulled out of that post pass.
Great point.
I guess one thing that we forgot and we don't want to glaze over is the burn down application too. A lot of people use paraquat for a burn down application depending on the timing, maybe if it's early or if it's a little bit later. For paraquat to work well, you need a trizene type of chemistry with it. And metribuzin is a great option for that for early burn down. It helps slow that paraquat down and makes it work better.
It definitely does. We've run some paraquat trials in the past where we've put metribuzin in, and it is probably 2 to 3 days slower in activity where we add that metribuzin, and it seems to maybe help that paraquat product. It doesn't necessarily translocate, but it just seems like it moves through the plant a little bit better when you add that trizene. There's a lot of nuances here, right? And kind of depends on the timing of the application and when you're making it. If I'm making that application early, if I'm burning down early and I'm not going to apply my residual product at that time, but I'm going to use paraquat. I probably need at least 4 ounces of metribuzin in that case to give us that effect that we're looking for in that paraquat application. And then what I'd want to do at that point is I'd want to add the balance of that metribuzin to my residual herbicide application, closer to planting.
What you're getting at is if you're doing an early application and then you need to burn down with gramoxone just to get rid of winter annuals, whatever else is out there at that time, you're just wanting to get it burnt down. It's not close to planting, so you're not wanting to burn up your water hemp residual at that time, right?
Exactly.
So, and if we do get a little closer to planting, then we can put the group 15 and the metribuzin along with the paraquat and just get a complete burn down plus residual.
That's right. And then I guess I want to clarify too, right now we're talking soybeans. On corn, if we're burning down in front of corn, we also want to add a trizene. And in that case, just an addition of atrazine will take care of that trizene component.
Absolutely. And then if you happen to use like a Roundup and a 2,4-D to burn down, do you have to include metribuzin with it? No. I would probably save it for my pre-emergent application and include it with my group 15 at that point. So speaking of corn burn down, using the gramoxone and then the trizene, which would be your atrazine, let's get into corn a little bit with the meso added to the group 15s. Mesotrione. So it's in a lot of premixes, and then also a good one to include with the group 15s. If you're putting a straight dual out there, so the max rate you can run on mesotrione is 7.7 ounces, right?
7.7 ounces per season. That's correct.
And you can split that up in a couple different applications.
You can. And, talking about like maybe a dual application, or even, maybe we're thinking about something like a degree extra application where we have an acetylchlor and an atrazine. It's just one more product that we can add to that tank mix, and it's relatively affordable to make that mix that much better. And keeping in mind that maximum use rate, so in that pre-emerge application, I would probably recommend something like 4 ounces, running 4 ounces of mesotrione, and then it's pretty typical to come back in a post-emerge application of mesotrione with 3 ounces. So that still keeps us under that maximum of 7.7 ounces per season.
And the goal here is to get added control against water hemp early on. So if we have that added control, we don't have the weeds getting out of hand, and it makes that post application more manageable. So by putting that 4 ounces with your pre early on, then you can keep smaller weeds. You're getting ahead of the water hemp. And then when you come back with that 3 ounces, then you're likely going to take them out because you're targeting hopefully less than 3-inch size weeds or 3-inch tall weeds.
And if you're not, and maybe there was a little bit more weed pressure out there in that post pass, we can juice that up a little bit and maybe run 3.5 ounces of meso at that point, just to give us a little bit more knockdown power.
So from what we've seen, looking at that, we thought it was a good time to bring it up. You've got metribuzin and you've got mesotrione or an HPPD of some sort that you can put with your pre-emergent on corn. But it's important as you guys look in your prepay situations or when you're making those decisions for the upcoming year, I would look and make sure that your pre-emergent application includes one of those two products, mesotrione or some sort of HPPD in corn, and then metribuzin in soybeans. With that, I think you'll get started on the right foot and then be ahead of the weeds for next season, which, like Eric said, for every inch of weed growth on corn is 4.6, and every inch of weed growth on soybeans is 0.7. So staying ahead of that and keeping all the bushels that you possibly can is going to be important, especially in the economic environment that we're in this year.
And the ultimate goal is to never see a weed come up.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and close this episode. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.